I'd say the legendary Phil. Phil, how are you?
I'm doing really good.
Yeah. Phil, my audience is international and national. Tell people about yourself. I mean, you're probably the most well-known in really the United States, I would say, muckraker, but I don't really like that term. How would you describe yourself?
Well, I think I'm pretty much a political columnist and zeroed in pretty much on the San Francisco Bay Area and the state of California, which in a lot of ways leads the nation, both in content and in controversy when it comes to politics. So I've been doing it for quite a number of years right now, and I've seen a lot of interesting changes in both parties and in the emergence of the third party, which is the declined state, people that don't really feel aligned with either of the two. So, in some ways, California is again on the leading edge of American politics, including the growth and this sort of disillusionment about the political system in many ways.
Let's go with that. I mean, first, real quick though, before we get to that, because I want to talk to you at length about it, what was your first big scoop?
You know, Zen, scoops, they come and they go, whether they be on the police beat, the court beat, sports and politics. You sit back sometimes and you flip through your clips and take a look at things, and to be quite honest, they just sort of fly by it like waves.
There's so many you forget last count, right?
Well, it's not just that there are a lot of things in the news business we call scoops.
Yeah.
Is that in retrospect, sometimes the things that we look at as scoops, somebody gaffed by a politician,
right,
being caught in the crossfire, something on the gossip front, something having to do with a department or a government agency, charities or nonprofits not being on the up and up. We covered them all, especially with my partner Andy Ross in the Mateer and Ross column. But sometimes you wonder whether these are the waves on the beach, and while they look big at the time when they crash, it's really the tide that sort of dictates, you know, what goes in and out of this harbor. And so when I look back on them, I go, that's interesting, but you try to look at the tides and the bigger shifts that go on.
Now, let's get to this other point. Let me ask you a question. Is California ungovernable? Because we have the initiative process, we saw the circus with Prop 8 and what happened with the Supreme Court's decision, the California Supreme Court, but I want to hear your view. And you've heard me ask you this before, is California ungovernable? Are we out of control?
You know, part of your question is really, is California governable or is it over-governable at this point? We have very active governments on a number of different fronts. We have, of course, your standard political government, which is elected every couple of years through your state assembly, your state senate, your governorships and different elective offices, your mayors, your city councils, your town councilors, all down the line. On top of that, we have, of course, the judicial system, which can turn around and say yes or no to whatever laws or decisions that those various entities make. Now that is some people say, well, is California or other states being governed by the courts? And if you look at things like prisons, roads, schools, and such like that, sometimes it appears that the courts, rather than the city councils and the legislatures, are making the primary calls. In California, we have another layer over that, which is the initiative process, which was initially the idea that if the voters didn't like something, they could put it on the ballot and they could change it, especially if the legislature or the courts were simply inactive and chose to ignore it. The first it was a dormant thing that was in paper and theory for many, many years, but really sprang to life a couple of decades back with the Proposition 13, the passage of that, the Great California Tax Revolt, which in turn led to the rise of Reagan and a number of other things nationally. As I was saying, California in some ways leads the country. That inspired people to say, well, we can take government in our own hands when the government refuses to act, simply ignores. And the initiative process then became very much a gauge of the overall political tides. In other words, if something in the city of Oakland here didn't want to deal with something, or in the city, or in Sacramento, they just found it uncomfortable. They didn't want to do tax reform or any other types of reforms, and the people would do it for them. That morphed into almost an independent process where businesses and political consultants and a lot of people just put things on the ballot for putting them on the ballot's sake.
Right.
And so now we have these sort of 3 layers of politics in California, 3 layers of governance, all competing at times, but at times also working together. And as an illustration of that, I would say, for example, recently California has many problems with its budgets and such. The legislature and the governor simply did not have the will or the votes to pass various things, so they went and said, we will put this in front of the voters and have them decide. That didn't work. Another question is, let's say, for example, gay marriage in California, Proposition 8. Voters said no to it. The city of San Francisco said yes to it, triggering a court fight that turned around and said no to it. And then the voters went and were asked again, and they said yes to it. Or they said no to gay marriage again. Excuse me. They said yes to Proposition 8.
The problem there.
But they said, but that is a process, and like it or not. And while people, like most processes, if it works in your favor, it works fine. If it doesn't get the results you want, then it needs fixing. And now California is having these discussions about having a constitutional convention and try to remake the playing field yet again.
Will we get there, though?
We may get to a constitutional convention. We might. I'm not sure that we're going to get anything out of it that's going to be substantive. One at the key of all of these problems, or at least in my opinion, is, as Willie Brown likes to say, it's not the system, it's the players.
Right.
And if you are a football team and you lost the Super Bowl, in politics these days in California, you'd say, well, what we need to do is change the rules. We need to make the goalpost closer. We could have won if we had gotten those last 10 yards. So let's make the field 90 yards rather than 110 yards. We do these things under the name of reform, and oftentimes all they do is they change the rules. But if you don't have the talent on the field, if you don't have the integrity on the field, I don't care how many rules you have, it's not going to work.
How much of these problems are born of the fact that we seem to have two states in one? And we talked for years about a split state need, but we've never done anything about it.
Well, it used to be that we had a split state, and people would say you have Northern California and Southern California. Yes. And the line there was drawn on the fact that Northern California, for example, had the water. We have the water up here. Southern California had the people.
Right.
But that's changed. Now California is pretty much divided into two states. Then it became Northern California, Southern California, and the Inland Empire. Now California is splitting into two states, and if you look at the results of the last elections over the last 10 years and projecting into the next 10, it becomes a split. There is coastal California, which is heavily urban, and then there is the interior of California, which is ex-urban, suburban, and growing cities and rural areas. And that is the two Californias. The two Californians are, sort of that strip from San Francisco or just north of San Francisco down to Los Angeles, and then the rest. Now, you can say you could split those, but I'm not sure that that's going to make that much difference, because I don't think either could exist without the other, as much as they don't want to admit it.
Because of the water issue?
For a number of issues. A water issue, the mere fact that whatever the coast has to sell and the inland's going to buy. It's always been every state is divided along certain lines. Ours are a little more potently geographic or obvious. If you go up to Oregon, they have the same split. Washington has much the same split. We're just a lot bigger than others.
What is it that coming locally to the Bay Area and Oakland and San Francisco, which you and I both know well, let me ask you a blunt question regarding first San Francisco and San Francisco Mayor Gavin Newsom. Why is he running for governor when there are those who feel that he hasn't finished being mayor of San Francisco?
Well, Zinni, let's be honest. If you and I had a rule, if there was a rule in national politics that you couldn't run for another office until you were quote unquote finished with your current one, we wouldn't have a President Obama.
That's
he was
true.
2 years in the Senate and then he moved on.
Are you comparing Gavin to Barack?
No, only in the fact that in American politics, yes, we have this evolution to where you pass through rather than necessarily complete. So that's not a new phenomenon at all. And the history is full of governors, senators, congresspeople who have moved on to other offices midterm or have cast their eyes high early and kept going.
But Phil, come on. I mean, I know Gavin, you know Gavin, I love Gavin, I think Gavin's a great guy, but I keep wondering why he didn't do the Jerry Brown move. Jerry was mayor of Oakland, he remade himself, concentrate on being mayor, and then became...
Zenny, you have to dust off your memory a little bit. Jerry Brown, no sooner did he get elected governor of California with his father's help, then he too ran for president.
That's true. I stand corrected.
Now he says that the voters never forgave him for it, and he didn't think it was a smart move, and he's never forgiven himself for having done that. But that didn't stop him from running for president again and again and again.
3 times, I believe.
So, with age comes wisdom sometimes. But in California, we also have Jerry Brown, who is, although not declared, obviously running for governor, and could well get in the Guinness Book of World Records for having been the first guy to be governor twice, non-consecutively.
Right.
And also have gone from being attorney general to governor, his father gone from governor to attorney general. What you're saying is in some essences why the leapfrogging and you want to know about Gavin Newsom and what the future lies for him.
Right.
He obviously sees himself as a person of destiny, of which the mayorship of San Francisco was a step to that, and there are, you would say, well, the governorship would be a step to another office. Yes, he is a creature of that world. It's an interesting paradox that he, as one of the agents of change and not the status quo and not the way things are going, in some ways he's very much like something out of a television politician, running from one office to another and such. That is politics as well. It is a game of ambition. It is a game of high ideals. It is a game of striving. Very rarely do we have situations where people who are underestimated wind up in positions and performances where they achieve greater than anyone expected. Harry Truman, for example, who was pretty much a political machine product and had been parked in the vice presidency as a caretaker nobody thought was going anywhere.
Ronald Reagan,
final days of... No, Ronald Reagan was always a rising star and a man of... on the move. He was the first true multimedia president of the United States. Jack Kennedy was probably the first televised one, but Ronald Reagan took it further, and had all. Unlike past mayors, whether it's Dianne Feinstein or Willie Brown, or even Art Agnos, who served. Frank Jordan was the last one we had, and he ran for re-election and got lost. What I was about to say is, Gavin has really not laid down a political infrastructure within the San Francisco. It's going to be a Bedouin regime. When he packs up his tent and moves on, the Sands will, within a day, cover up most of any political tracks he had there.
Any surprises in the city attorney's race that might lead to mayor?
Well, I think that, the city attorney of San Francisco, Dennis Herrera, is obviously a top candidate for mayorship. State Senator Leland Lee would like to see himself the first Chinese American to be mayor of San Francisco. Bevan Dufty would like to be the first gay mayor. We have a number of different people out there. But in politics, as you well know, you don't know the field until the bell rings, and because things change quickly. Here in Oakland, for example, you had the return of Ron Dellums.
Right.
Before that, they had Jerry Brown come in. Who knows? In Oakland, everybody says who's going to run. And, of course, he's already running.
Yeah.
But maybe Sean Penn will move to Oakland and run for mayor. I'm just joking on that. But the point is, we are not in
or
politics.
Van Jones,
right? In politics, you just don't know.
Now, speaking of Oakland, and I have to say, it seems like Parada is unbeatable. I can't see anybody stepping in that could beat him but what gets me, Phil, and you can correct me on this, I appreciate if you did, is I admire Don, but I always thought his want was to ascend beyond mayor instead of be mayor of Oakland. Am I looking at that the wrong way?
I think that for Don Parada, there's always been a split path there. On one, he did go up very high in state government, and he ran for controller, I believe, on the statewide level, and he didn't make it in the primary. There's ambition there, but he did go up there. He did get a good look inside the governor's office. He did look at those others. And I think at his heart, there are two types of politicians. There are a number of different types of politicians, but there are two big ones. There's the executive, those that long to be the executive and be in control, and those who enjoy the debate and want to move. Now, some say that a successful senator is nothing more than a frustrated presidential candidate. You didn't quite make it there, Ted Kennedy, so you become this. Or in the assembly, Willie Brown, you could not rise. Willie Brown always knew he could not win statewide, but he became the leader of the powerhouse of an assembly. He grabbed what area he could excel at. Don Perrotta is more on the executive side.
Right.
Dianne Feinstein's more on the executive side, but she's in the Senate now, acting as an executive if you're next to her.
Controversial question regarding Oakland and black politics. If Perrotta wins, does that mean black politics is dead in Oakland, as some have claimed?
No. You have to understand the art of politics can either be very obvious and theatrical on the street or very subtle. You could make an argument.
Well stated.
You can make an argument that if I was talking in straight political numbers or a political power of it, you would go, okay. Let's say, are you saying that the absence of a black mayor would lessen the political power in Oakland?
No, it's not so much black mayor, but council members, people who are active.
Well, let's take a look at this.
Okay, sure. Larry Reed Delphi.
You could sit and say, perhaps, and this is strictly on a I would say, okay, you have an African American mayor.
Right.
You have two members on the city council.
Right.
Two members on the county board of supervisors.
Right. But Phil, we've had more.
Excuse me.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
One state assembly person. Congress. Your Congress.
Yeah.
Barbara Lee.
Yes.
That is a pretty strong black police chief, black fire chief.
Right.
So there's a pretty strong front there on both within the infrastructure of government and on the elected front.
But Phil, I gotta ask you though.
Right.
We had more black council members 15 years ago in Oakland. We had
But
more.
also, if you're going to let me continue,
I apologize.
there's also been a change in the population of Oakland.
Yes. Yes. Very true.
Now,
Very true.
is at what you'd say, okay, at what point is is it reflective of the city? If that is the goal, then does that come with the ebb and flow as well?
And I would agree with you. It does reflect how the city has changed. We have our first lesbian council member. We have a large lesbian population per capita. So yeah, it does.
Okay.
But my contention is that even with that, those who are African American and politically involved are not as cohesive as they used to be. That's all.
Well, what is the reason for that?
I don't know.
Well, part of it is possibly with success comes complacency.
I agree. Also, lack of leadership. No, the older ones.
I don't
didn't
think
lead
you
the
have
ones,
what leadership. If you
Right.
have a black congresswoman, a black state assembly
No
person.
mentors. Nobody mentors.
Well, that is not for lack of quote unquote leadership.
Okay.
Now, Ron Dellums was the congressperson. He handed it to Barbara Lee. That's a mentorship. That's right.
That's true. But they're
Barbara
older than
Lee,
me.
Sandra Johnson worked for, but they're what?
They're older than me.
Well, okay. Well, that is a universal in all politics.
Oh.
The young versus old is one of the cuts across all political lives.
Interesting. Fascinating.
Now, whether the young want to organize and around what issues, that remains to be seen. Would a Perrotta or this? I don't know. You could make an argument that perhaps a Perrotta or a Jerry Brown, as former mayor, actually increased African American and other participation because they felt like they needed to fight for something.
What I see among the young, I see younger, and I say this just bluntly, younger, very talented white women in Oakland in politics. Frida Jett, who runs the East Bay Young Democrats, is well liked and moving forward as just one example. But that's why I say, there's a strong group over there that's unmatched in any area.
Well, all I can say is that, at the core of politics in America is a person gets to decide their willingness and their level of involvement.
True. Yes.
It's not mandated. You don't get drafted. You decide how much you want to be involved or not be involved. Now, in terms of politics also, as we go back to the idea of courts, if we have, if, for example, one of the great organizing tools is economics, the idea of getting a piece of the pie. If the piece of the pie is mandated through various contract quotas or whatever you want to call them, do you need to elect somebody to get those? Or if they're already taken care of, is there a need to organize?
Great point. Yeah, that's an excellent point. Shift gears for a second. Forecast the governor's race for me. Or are you afraid to?
I don't have to forecast it. I mean, it hasn't started yet. What we have are people hovering around. We have Gavin Newsom. We have Jerry Brown. On the Republican side, we have Meg Whitman, Steve Poizner, Tom Campbell, and that's pretty much it over on that side. So a race is when the running starts. What we have now is people putting on their sneakers and looking in the mirror.
Boxer? Vulnerable?
Anybody in national office is going to be vulnerable when we have things like health care and the economy in this situation. It's no secret that when your president, the party of your president is in office, midterm elections, oftentimes you're vulnerable. Yes, of course she is. Every politician is vulnerable. And I don't have to say that. They feel that in their bones. Even if they're uncontested, they always feel vulnerable.
Well, you're a busy man. I could sit here all day and talk to you, but I want to thank you for your time. How can people catch you on sfgate.com, but also in the San Francisco Chronicle and Channel 4, is that right?
Channel 5.
Channel 5.
And on KCBS in the mornings and afternoons.
Phil, thank you so much.